Hello, and welcome to the first episode of a new close reading series from the London Review of Books, Conversations in Philosophy. I'm James Wood, and I'm joined by Jonathan Ray. Hello, Jonathan.
Hello.
We're starting this series with Søren Kierkegaard's extraordinary work, Fear and Trembling, published in 1843, though to say that it's published in 1843 is somewhat beside the point, given that he published 6 books in that year. A wildly productive, radical, extraordinary thinker. Jonathan, why are we beginning with Fear and Trembling?
Well, it's a book that means a lot to me personally. I first encountered it, 40 years ago when I was a cocky young atheist. And I thought, oh God, this bloody Christianity business, why is it going on so long? And I expected, Kierkegaard has a reputation that precedes him for being a very serious and glum and probably rather tedious old theologian. And I opened it at the first chapter, and I read these words: "There was once a man," or sometimes, "Once upon a time there was a man. He had learned as a child that beautiful tale of how God tried Abraham, how Abraham withstood the test and kept his faith, and for the second time received a son against every expectation." Now, I think Kierkegaard would have assumed that everyone would have known this, these 12 or 13 verses from Genesis. I think we can't assume that. I certainly didn't know them when I first read this. And I'm going to ask James, who I think was brought up as a proper Christian, if he could read them in a proper Christian way.
I don't know if I was brought up as a proper Christian. I had some dalliance with the evangelical movement. Not, I should say, myself as an evangelical, but thanks to the oddities of my parents. And I know exactly what you're talking about, Jonathan. This may come out in our conversations. One of the difficulties for me, one of the things I still resist when I read Kierkegaard is the, of course, excessive and pressurized use of the word faith, because the evangelical tradition has so debased that word in some ways, and it casts such a shadow on my teenage years that I have a hostility almost to the word itself. Anyway, let me start by reading the passage from Genesis 22, and it's the famous, very brief story in which Abraham is tested by God and commanded to take his son, is commanded by God to sacrifice his son. Sometime later, God tested Abraham. He said to him, "Abraham." "Here I am," he replied. Then God said, "Take your son, your only son, whom you love, Isaac, and go to the region of Moriah. Sacrifice him there as a burnt offering on a mountain I will show you." Early the next morning, Abraham got up and loaded his donkey. He took with him 2 of his servants and his son Isaac. When he'd cut enough wood for the burnt offering, he set out for the place God had told him about. On the 3rd day, Abraham looked up and saw the place in the distance. He said to his servants, "Stay here with the donkey while I and the boy go over there. We will worship, and then we will come back to you." Abraham took the wood for the burnt offering and placed it on his son Isaac, and he himself carried the fire and the knife. As the 2 of them went on together, Isaac spoke up and said to his father, "Father?" "Yes, my son," Abraham replied. "The fire and wood are here," Isaac said, "but where is the lamb for the burnt offering?" Abraham answered, "God himself will provide the lamb for the burnt offering, my son." And the 2 of them went on together. When they reached the place God had told him about, Abraham built an altar there and arranged the wood on it. He bound his son Isaac and laid him on the altar on top of the wood. Then he reached out his hand and took the knife to slay his son. But the angel of the Lord called out to him from heaven, "Abraham, Abraham." "Here I am," he replied. "Do not lay a hand on the boy," he said. "Do not do anything to him. Now I know that you fear God, because you have not withheld from me your son, your only son." Abraham looked up, and there in a thicket he saw a ram caught by its horns. He went over and took the ram and sacrificed it as a burnt offering instead of his son. So Abraham called that place, "The Lord will provide." And to this day it is said, on the mountain of the Lord it will be provided.
Well, thank you, James. It is such an incredible story, and the way it is told without any subjectivity, without any commentary, it's just one fact after another. And it's just left to the reader to say, God, this father is about to murder his only son. And I think that a lot of Christians have tried to somehow work their way around it and saying, well, it's just a parable, and obviously it prefigures the death of Jesus. And there's actually a wonderful Wilfred Owen alternative ending of in his poem, The Parable of the Old Man and the Young, which tells the story right up to the moment when Abraham is offered the ram. And Owen's version goes on, but the old man would not sow, but slew his son, and half the seed of Europe one by one. And I think it's very tempting to crowd into this story and add commentary to it. And I think Kierkegaard, the whole point of Kierkegaard's book is that once we start trying to explain it, we show that we haven't understood it. And so, can I just read the next few sentences after we've had... There once was a man who read this story. He'd learned as a child. But now, when he grew older, he read the same story with even greater admiration. For life had divided what had been united in the child's pious simplicity. The older he became, the more often his thoughts turned to that tale. His enthusiasm became stronger and stronger, yet less and less could he understand it. So if we want to say that this book has a polemical a purpose, it is that the itch to understand is one that we should resist, that the true wisdom resides in recognizing that things are incomprehensible.
Yes, absolutely. It's extraordinary to write a book in which the narrator is constantly admiring, commending, praising, but as it were, not recommending. This is not recommended at home, as it were. He even says at one point, the idea that contemplation of this tale will lead to will lead to greater faith is wrong. The knight of faith is a witness, but not a teacher, he says later on in the book. And by knight of faith, I mean a knight with a K, someone on a horse, an inspired, divinely inspired Don Quixote figure. So, yes, we have this analysis of the tale that is, you might say, constantly in the negative. What is it to think through the demonic aspects of this story? But we're maybe getting ahead of ourselves. You said, Jonathan, absolutely rightly, that because this biblical story is so spare, so fraught with background, as Auerbach put it, there's been a tendency over the centuries, from very early on, to fill it with commentary. And Kierkegaard, it might be said that Kierkegaard does and doesn't do that. But he does begin, doesn't he, by doing a version of that, by writing some possible endings that are different from the one he thinks we should be pondering. And that's the beginning of the book, the section called Attunement.
But I think we're getting ahead of ourselves again. I would like to draw your attention, first of all, to the title page.
Yes.
And I can't really speak Danish, or at least I certainly can't when Danish people are listening, but the title page is Frygt og Bæven, dialectisk lyrik af Johannes de Silentio. Fear and Trembling. Now, that's a biblical reference, as Kierkegaard's first readers would have recognized, to St. Paul saying to the Philippians, you must work out your own salvation with fear and trembling. So working out your own salvation is not said on the title page, but I think that's very much what we're supposed to read. And then it's called a dialectical lyric on the title page. It's like a logical poem, a logical lyric. It's nonsense. I mean, well, it's a contradiction. It's rather than nonsense. Some people think the first half of the book is lyric, and the second half of the book is dialectic. And there's obviously something to be said for that. The first half of the book is written in a much more poetic style, and the second half is set out in these problemata, which are like almost a caricature of academic overkill. And then, you notice, it says of Johannes de Silentio. This book, like nearly all of Kierkegaard's, whatever it was, 30 or 40 books that he published by the time he died at the age of 42, does not have his name on the title page. It's written by a pseudonym called Johannes of the Silence. And he plays this game throughout his writings of, you never know, is this actually Kierkegaard speaking? He once said, when he confessed that he'd been writing these pseudonymous books, and I think most people in Denmark did actually know, because he was quite a well-known figure, that they were by him. But the pretense was that he weren't. And he said, no, I am not the author of these books. I, Søren Kierkegaard, was just the assistant to my pseudonyms. And so the whole thing is set up as a kind of endless, like an Escher drawing, a puzzle where you can never find the beginning. And then he goes on, and then you get this rather beautiful preface. And there again, prefaces. One of the books that Kierkegaard wrote was actually called Prefaces. And it was written by a pseudonym called Nicolaus Nota Bene. And the story is that this man got married and his wife wanted him to stop reading books. And so he thought, well, I won't write books, I'll just write prefaces. So this book is a collection of the 8 prefaces. And so you know you're always, well, the good thing and the annoying thing about Kierkegaard is you know you're always being played for a fool.
Thanks for listening to this extract from Close Readings. You can listen to the full episode and all our other Close Readings series by signing up to our Close Readings subscription. If you're listening in Apple, you can do that just by going to the top of this podcast. Or for Spotify and other podcast apps, go to lrb.me/audio or click on the link in the description.